So I've been asked to do a quick brush or overview on some recent published research work that is addressing gestation sow housing. That is a very broad topic to cover in 15 minutes. So when I was putting together these slides for today's panel, I decided to refine that search down to these search parameters. I decided to use the Journal of Animal Science first as the journal that I would be interested in digging into, because I really like the journal and I like the material that's placed into that journal. So Journal of Animal Science was the journal that I searched in. I searched the following terms: sow gestation and housing. And I also tried to keep it recent, and so my searching parameter was from January to December of 2012. So that was the focus for this talk. That search resulted in 4 peer-reviewed papers that addresses gestation sow housing. Okay, and they are listed right here on the slide today. The lower 2 were intriguing papers. The lowest one was actually addressing the effects of lighting levels and temperature ranges on immune behavior and performance of sows housed individually in gestation stalls. And the paper directly above that was looking at sows in gestation systems and looking at different ways of actually feeding those sows, which can be a challenge. However, I decided to focus on the top 2, the Salek-Johnson paper and the Yushi Lee paper for today's talk. So the first one is by a group from the University of Illinois, spearheaded by Dr. Janine Salek-Johnson and her colleagues Dedecker, Horstman, and Rodriguez-Zas. And the objective of this study was quite broad, and again, for the interest of today's talk, I'm going to narrow it down to a smaller, manageable amount of data to present to you. They were interested in looking at pen sizes for gestation sows, and they compared this back to the individual gestation stall, which many producers still use. They were interested in looking at the behavior of these animals, as well as a variety of immune functions as well. But again, for the purpose of today's talk, I'm going to address behavior of these animals. So they used a PIC, crossbred PIC animal. They had a total of 217 animals within this study. And again, they were comparing the individual gestation stall to these pens. They had a variety of parities within this study as well, as you can see listed here, ranging from the P1s up to and over the parity 4. When they housed these animals in the pens, the flooring was partially slatted concrete, but they did have a strip of solid concrete, which is where they floor fed the sows in these pen systems. And the individual gestation stall is pretty standard of what we would see out there on our commercial farms. They had fully slatted flooring and then a concrete feeding trough for these ladies. So they then placed 5 sows were then placed into one of these treatments, and then they replicated it numerous times to make up that 217. The treatments that they had within this study was 3 different space allowances for sows. So in the first treatment, they had 1.4 meters squared per sow, and for us here in the States, it's about 15 square feet. Okay. Treatment 2 was 2.3 meters squared per sow, 24. Treatment 3 was 3.3 meters squared, or about 35.5 square foot. And then treatment 4 was our individual gestation stall. And just as a quick comparison for you, that the the directive that's now in law in the European Union, which relates to gestation sow housing, and that came into effect for the 27 countries on the 1st of January of this year, although I think some of our panels will certainly discuss the compliance of that here a little bit later. The law does state that for a sow, a mature sow, which is a parity 1 or greater by definition, needs that 24 square foot. So that treatment 2 would be sort of representative of what the EU space allowance is currently in those member countries. A gilt requires a little less within that directive at 1.67, but this study wasn't looking at a gilt, so that's why you don't see that one funnel through in the treatments. So the behaviors that they were interested in was a variety of postures: lie, sit, stand, and walk. And then the behaviors of interest here in this study was eating, drinking, sham chewing, which is where they make that mouth movement, open and close, but they're not actually eating food, oral, nasal, facial behaviors, and aggression as well. So jumping right into the behavioral measures for this study, and I'll orientate you a little bit to this slide. We have the different measures of interest here. So this is the behaviors that they were interested in, and the number of times that these animals performed these given behaviors over an hour period. They collected these behaviors on day 95 of gestation over a 24-hour cycle, and they sampled these animals' behaviors every 5 minutes. So that was kind of the method that they used. We then have the treatments of interest. We have the 1.4, the 2.3, the 3.3, and our individual gestation store here. And we have two different values over here, which is our p-value, which notes that difference or non-difference. And so the very first one here is considered to be space, and this would be the comparisons back and forward between all of these different options, between these treatments. The store versus pen is where the authors would lump together all of the pen information and just compare that directly back to the store. So that's the first one I'm just going to do a quick comparison on, which I pulled out down here for you. So in comparing gestation sows housed in stalls compared to all of these gestational pens, regardless of space allowance, sows in stalls sat and drank more and laid less. Okay, so that's probably not a big surprise to many of you in here. When looking at the space, so comparing back and forth between these, we start to see that sows housed in the gestation space at 3.3, which was the biggest one, they lie more than those which are housed in gestation stalls. But sows in gestation stalls sit more often than the other sows in the pen situations. We also see that for oral, nasal, facial behaviors in this higher space allowance, they perform less oral, nasal, facial behaviors in the 3.3 compared to the EU directed space allowance, which is 2.3, and they're not similar across these ones here. So the difference here is between this one and this one for oral, nasal, facial. So the take-home message from this particular study of interest is that behavior was a very interesting tool to collect. We use it a lot in our assessment programs and now in our auditing programs as well. It allows for us to be able to get a first and quick and often early blush on how an individual animal is doing within a given set of circumstances or housing systems. In this case, the sow housed at different space allowances and or within the gestation stall as well. The main behavioral restraint of the gestation stalls, which again is not majorly new here, is that they lay less, but they sit more often. But an interesting part of this study, which would certainly need to be investigated in more detail, is the occurrence of this oral, nasal, facial related behavior, and that it occurred most often at this 2.3 meters squared per sow. It has been shown to be a behavior that's considered to be energetically consuming, i.e. when they're performing more of these behaviors, more energy is being put into these oral, nasal, facial behaviors, and therefore that is not being then directed back into the sow for maintaining her body condition score and or in gestation, which is important going back into that pregnancy. So I think this is an intriguing finding and one that would need to be looked into much more detail. However, the overall take-home from this message point in this study with these particular treatments in this setup and the way that they were fed and housed and managed, no one system in this study excelled in improving or compromising the sow's health, behavior, and overall well-being, i.e. all of these could work on a farm. Okay? So the second study that I'm going to present is by Yushi Lee, Wang, and Johnston. And this research group is through the University of Minnesota. And their objective was to investigate the effects of sorting by parity on aggression, stress, and performance in young sows when group housed during gestation. The animals in this study were a York Landrace cross. They were housed in straw-bedded hoop barns. Each hoop barn had 4 pens with 15 animals per pen. They were fed individually, but did share a group deep-bedded space and also water drinking facilities as well. And the space allowance was 3.7 meters squared, and this did not include that feeding area and the water drinkers. So there were 2 treatments here. We had a control, or what we would often see in a commercial setting, which is defined as the sow pen, okay, in this particular study. And this was made up of 4 first parity sows and 11 multi-parity sows, which would be P2s and higher. And then the treatment was gilt pen, and again it had 15 animals, 4 first parity, but this time we had 11 gilts. Jumping directly into the results, they took an extensive list of reproduction measures, which was great. They looked at wean to mating interval, gestation length, at the time of farrowing, the number born, the total born alive, stillborns, mummies, all the things that we're very interested in collecting. They looked at body condition score of the sow as well as her back fat thickness. And in a nutshell, between the sow pen, which is this first column, and the gilt pen, which were the treatments of interest, there was no differences in those reproduction measures. Okay. The intriguing one was the body weight in kilograms. And I've pulled that one out here, over here, just so it pops out a little bit more for you. At the time of forming these groups, at the beginning of gestation, you can see there wasn't a difference in the body weight. But before farrowing, they re-weighed these first parity animals again. And over here, when the first parity were housed in these gilt pen configurations, they actually gained more during that gestation period compared to their counterparts of first parity, which were in these sow pens. Looking at injury scores, this was scored 48 hours after these pens had been formed. And so when they went into a sow pen or into a gilt pen, they started off at the same level. Okay. 48 hours after mixing had occurred, we see some differences going on with the number of injuries on the body and the total number of injuries on these first parity animals, with more injuries being noted when they're in that sow pen configuration compared to the gilt pen. It's a little busy, but I'll take some time quickly to go through this. The first figure is looking at total duration in seconds per hour, and this is for aggression. And this is the number of times aggression is occurring, or that frequency number per hour. The authors then divided this 72 hours. So again, they were mixed, the groups are formed, and then they watched them continually for 72 hours to get this information. And they broke it up into subsections of 0 to 6 hours, 6 to 24, 24 to 48, and 48 to 72. And what this is really showing in a nutshell is that in the first 6 hours, these first parity sows, regardless of if they're in a gilt pen or if they're in a sow pen, they're going to fight. Okay, many of you are like, I know that. I've seen that. Okay, so that's where it happens. But then after the 6 hours and up to including the 72 hours where these animals were being watched, there wasn't any difference. So it was intense for 6 hours, and then it plateaued and calmed down. Okay, and this included head knocking, head to body knocking, head to head knocking, and parallel pressing. Very quickly, again, breaking down aggression again for this first 72 hours. Now we're looking at first parity animals in a gilt pen or first parity animals in a sow pen. If the first parity cells are in a gilt pen, they're going to fight more frequently, tend to fight for longer. They'll have more head to body fights, more parallel pressing. They tend to parallel press longer, and they'll win more of those parallel pressing fights than if they're in a sow pen. Okay, so they seem to be a little bit more top dog or top pig in this gilt pen versus the sow pen. So again, the take-home message from this study: most fighting with these first parity sows are going to occur within 6 hours of mixing. When first parity sows are in gilt pens at mixing, they fight more frequently, tend to fight longer, and will win more often. However, these first parity sows in these gilt pens, even though they fight more often and perhaps for longer, they have fewer injuries. And the first parity sows in these gilt pens tended to gain, or did gain, more body weight during the gestation period. So the take-home message from this study suggests that farmers should consider dividing their herd into gilt and first parity groups, and then multi-parity defined as P2s or greater, and house these groups in separate pens to help improve the well-being and performance of these first parity sows. My last slide is just really a heads up. Chekhov has funded an awful lot of gestation sow housing over the last 13 years. They do have a fact sheet that collectively pulls together these topics, the outline of the experiments and the research findings, and so they are also available for producers to be able to get more information on managing gestation sow housing related issues. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to be here to try and share some information. Generally speaking, a farmer's first ability isn't public speaking, but I will try to do the best I can today. I would just like to give a little bit of a background, and I would like to say that in 2007, we decided, and by choice, to try large pen gestation. And we did it with some reservation and some worry, but we chose to do it, and we went into it with the idea that we were going to make it work. And I would just like to go on record here today saying that there isn't anybody that ever should have to build large pen gestation. Everybody should have the choice to do it. And so I support our Iowa Pork Board, our National Pork Board, and I thank them for the efforts that they are making to preserve that choice. So what I'm doing today, I went back because I've got quite a few years of data, and what I did is I went back and took 4 consecutive years of comparison. And what I did is I used a 3,000 sow unit that's large pen gestation. It's bred in stalls and then moved down into its electronic feeding station. And then I took the closest other unit that we have, which is a 2,500 sow unit that was built within 2 years of it. So I tried to take as close in size and as close in age of a unit. Both units are managed by the same man, fed by the same genetics. We manufacture all of our own feed, so it's the same feed. And so I don't know how you could get closer of a comparison. So what I'm going to do is really in the end, I'm going to show how much the same they are in production rather than showing what I found that they're different in production. So I have a few slides and more so maybe just to generate questions later. But what we have is I just have a picture showing the large pen gestation. Now, Anna was talking about square foot, and actually the square foot that we're using is about 20.5. The pens were built to have 23.5 and to be loaded at 65 sows, and what we found is that they're working very good at 75 sows. So when we load them at 75 sows, we have about 20.5 square feet. I had somebody ask me today, and they said, well, when you look at pen gestation, you've got to look at the larger footprint of your building. And that's exactly right, but something that I found that was interesting is our stall gestation buildings are not making 1 year for manure holding. And that extra footprint has been a help to us because that unit, our unit with the large pens will make it for a full year. So there is an advantage that most people probably don't think of in that larger square foot. What we have here is it happened the day I was in taking pictures. It was empty. It's a training station that we have, and what we do is we move 75 gilts at a time in to our training station, and they're trained for 2 weeks, and then they're put in stalls and they're bred in stalls. And it isn't a 100% cure-all, but most of those gilts then, when they're moved down into the large pen, take very little extra work or very little training. And I know sometimes it's an issue, and people ask, well, what about sows that can't be trained? And so when I was in there the other day, I asked the fellow that does the gilt training, I said, well, how many sows, what percentage of sows do we have that can't be trained? And he says, well, in the last year, he says, I can just think of one. So basically, one sow out of a 40 to 45% replacement rate on 3,000 sows, one sow that he couldn't train. So we haven't found that to be an issue. The sows, the gilts before they come in here, they're all crate broke, and a large portion of them are heat no serviced. So when they come in here, 2 weeks of training, then they go into the stalls to be bred. That's a repeat picture. Basically, just another picture of the electronic feeding station. Just might interject here while I'm thinking of it. I did a little bit of work as well to compile some feed records. And I took a 2-year period and found out that our feed consumption on our large pen gestation, the sows were eating 67 pounds per year per sow more than in the stalled gestation. But then when I got thinking about that, that seems to be a negative. But the sows, our cull sows that are coming out of that unit are larger than the ones coming out of the stalled units. And so I don't have the exact figures to back that up because we commingle all of our cull sows. So that's only an observation I have. But I would guess that the extra value in the cull sows probably is compensating for the extra feed that goes in. What we find is that the sows are calm. And, I mean, as you see, I didn't take this picture, like I didn't go through and say, well, I want to find a few sows that don't show scrapping signs of scratches or bitten vulvas, but that's not the case. This was just a random shot. And what we find in our setting is that we have very little problem with that. And we fill our large pen gestation by breeding days. We fill 2 of them a week approximately in that unit, and it's all parities. Gilts through everything, all parities. And so we don't separate out any parities, and we have not found that to be a problem. Now, what I would like to suggest, though, is that what I'm presenting here is something that's working very well for us. But if somebody was to ask me, is it a one-size-fits-all, I would say no. Stalled gestation is much more of a one-size-fits-all because I can only speak for the genetics we have and for the management we have. And so I would suggest that there could be a difference in genetics. Feet and legs are definitely an issue, and then aggressiveness is an issue. So all I can do today is I can present what we've done and with the animals that we use. But we also have 3 other sow units, and they're all stalled gestation. And I go through them, and I'm impressed with the sow handling and with the sow condition in those as well. And so I like this unit, and I like our other 3 units, and I don't want anybody ever telling me I have to convert the other 3 units. So that's my, I want to emphasize my stand on that. What we have found is that for vaccination or 60-day preg check, we were worried at first as to how that was going to go, but our guys have adapted very well to that, and they just move slowly through the pens. We've got gates that we can gate them off if we need to, but it hasn't been an issue for vaccinating or preg checking. Now, we do have one distinct advantage is that we have a few extra stalls in that unit. So what we do is we use them as hospital stalls, but we are very careful what sows we move down to the large pens. So if we can anticipate a sow that's going to have any kind of a problem, we don't wait to have to take her out of the large pens to put her into a hospital stall. She goes in there rather than going down. So that is a definite advantage that we have. And so there is our fallout percentage is actually quite small, but we've got the luxury of being able to handle it like that. Okay, now what I'm going to show you is just a 4-year comparison. And the average female inventory on the stalled unit was 2434. The large pen was 2938. The stalled unit was built in 2005, and the pennant unit was built in 1,500 in 2002, and then we expanded in 2007, went to large pens to make that unit. And then the sows in the large pens are bred in stalls, as I mentioned, and moved when they're found preg positive. Now, I thought that rather than me using my production numbers, what I would sooner do is just use a comparison. And then you can plug in your own production numbers. Wean to first service, what we have is the large pen comparison was 1.3 days less. But the farrowing rate was 1.35% less. The adjusted farrowing was 1.59 less. The average total born was 0.06 less. The average live born was 0.20 less. And so basically going down through here, you say, well, the stalled is losing on every measurement. Now, I don't know why, but this is a 4-year pig nose comparison. I pulled it off. This percentage of stillborns was 1.68 higher, but the mummies was less, and the pig's wean per sow was 0.07 less. But then we came to pre-weaning mortality. That's basically what made up the difference of all the other things. We had a 1% less pre-weaning mortality. Can I explain that? Well, I can't give a scientific explanation, but I believe it's because of the feed curve. The excellent feed curve that the computer uses to feed those sows in late gestation, and possibly some exercise of that sow could make the difference. So that's 1 point less. Replacement rate was 5.57 higher. Percent female deaths and destroyed actually was 0.29 less. I don't know. Other people are maybe finding otherwise, but what we found is a slightly less death loss there. Non-productive sow days was 3.1 higher. Litters mated per female per year was 0.02 higher. Bottom line is the one that I look at. Pigs weaned per mated female per year. The large pen was 0.06 higher. Now, you couldn't be closer. The only way you could be closer was to be exact. That's a very, 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 very minor difference. I went through them the other day just for my own information. I thought, well, I did a 4-year. I pulled out 4 years. I thought, well, let's pull out 6 years. So what I did is I pulled out 6 years and I looked at the number, and it flipped around, and the stalled unit was on a 6-year comparison was 0.03 higher. So what I came away, it was an interesting study for myself as well, and what I came away with is not the difference there was, but how similar the production was. So basically, bottom line, what my consensus is by choice, I've got one. I'm happy to have it. I like both systems, and I strongly promote that everybody continue to have their choice of which system they would like.
And I'd like to echo John's comments as well. When I went through this remodel, it was definitely a choice. We built a sow unit in 1997, and by 2007, it was starting to show its age. We had I guess I'll go through this. It was 4 rows of 112 crates was our gestation snake, and then we had 1 row of 48 stalls. It's our breed stalls with pins behind it. And then we have 10 additional pins for our gilts, for heat checking, culls, some of the late weaners, lames, recovery pins, etc. And then we also have we had 2 rows of gestation crates for gilts, and we use that as our parking lot for our snake to fill in when dropouts occurred. And it was all 50-50 slats underneath everything there, and that's kind of how it was set up. So when I got to the point where I wanted to remodel, these 4 rows of 112 is what I decided to take out. We kept the breed stalls here, and we also kept the pins and then in the gilt breeding, and we still utilize all them today. But like I said, there had to be something done. Our precast slats that we had in there were starting to leak pretty badly, so we were either going to have to line them or replace them. And the tubes on our stalls were starting to rust up to the bottom rung and starting to come loose. And then the feet were starting to get loose, and the sows could bang them up and down, and they're starting to break feed boxes. And also, these were 7 by 22 stalls, and it seemed like on some of those bigger girls, they were too small. Those girls didn't have any room in them. So I decided, and like Ken said, I was on a few national committees. I was on the Animal Health and Swine Welfare Committee, and you could kind of tell that maybe there was a chance. Hopefully we never get to the point where stalls would be banned. And I wanted to stay ahead of the curve on that too. So, and like John said, I made the choice to switch to this. So I decided to go with the AGS system by Schick Enterprises. And some of the reasons I did was I had a local contractor that sold it. So I had somebody that was close that knew what was going on with the system. If a computer went down on this system, I still have the ability to feed sows, because it just it opens up the gates and it lets the sows through. And you'll kind of see here in a little bit. I'll show a layout of it. But that was important to me, and it is a good thing, because I've had 2 lightning strikes that have taken out either the controller or the communicators in the board itself on my sorters, and I've also lost my LAN board on my computer once from lightning strikes. So I've done a few things to rectify that by putting in surge protectors and getting rid of my phone line, and I think that's made a difference. And then I could see in my mind how this was going to work. At the time, we were farrowing in groups every 2 weeks, and I could see how I could make this work in the space that I had. And so this is kind of how it's set up today. Like I said, we kept our breeding stalls, we kept the pens, we kept the gilt parking lot, and we tore out the 4 stalls. And now we have it's kind of set up like a sort system, if you've ever seen a layout like that, where we've got 2 pens. The small pen here holds 185 sows, and the big side holds 235. We've got a row of feeders here, they drop on cement, and then there's either side of these 2 rows here are feeding stalls when we drop the feed. The middle 2 rows of slats, we had Altenburg Construction come in, and they tore out the 50-50 slats and put in full slats, because I thought I had way too much solid area there for the sows. And then on top of it, to fill the boxes, we put a big Dutchman chain disc system in, and then there's an AP trickle feed system that'll deliver the feed to the sows. And so this is kind of how it looks today. This would be the large side. And so we've got the water court. We kind of had these, when we started, I also had cup waters on the fence lines, and the sows just chewed them up, and they were destroying them right and left. I had water leaking everywhere. So we had stainless water troughs with constant level pans, or stainless water pans with the constant level waters on them, and they seem to hold up pretty well to the sows. There's 2 of them in each pen. And then, so the sows come in through the one-way gates. There's 3 one-way gates to get the drink, and then they go back into the loping side through my, it's called an interrogator. The sows go in, there's a panel reader there that reads a tag, logs that they went through, and then it'll perform a function if there's one assigned to that tag. They can either be sorted out if we need to farrow them, or if they need to get locked up, or they can be marked with 2 different colors. And also, if they're a missing tag, I can have it mark them or sort them out also. Just depends on what I need done for the day. And I guess I'd like to thank Dale Miller for some of these pictures. I found out that I'm not a very good cameraman, and I don't have a very good camera. So I asked Dale. He had visited my farm in 2008, and I asked him for a few of these pictures. So the clear ones are from him, and the spotty ones you see coming up later are from me. But you can see here the trickle feed system is set up. It fills the boxes, and then in the morning the balls are raised, and a motor turns underneath them, and I think it's like a 3 RPM motor, and it takes right at about 15 minutes to drop all the feed out of a box. And the theory behind that is the feed is dropped slowly. The pigs aren't prone to move from one station to another to try to steal the feed. It seems like it still drops it plenty fast. When we began, we had little 3-phase gear motors on the end that had a rheostat so we could change the speed on them. but the three-phase was throwing off a frequency that interrupted the tag reader, so it couldn't read tags when those were on. So we went to just a fixed RPM motor on them, and that's rectified the problem. But now I can't adjust the speed on them. So the AGS part of the system, like I said, was that sorter, and all tags have RFID tags, and that number is corresponded to their tattoos. And those are all the interrogators. There's two of them, one for each pin, are connected to the network cable to a data module, which is up in my office. And then that data module will hold the tags, the tattoo numbers, the grouping information, and then I can access that data module through a web browser. And then, like I said, those interrogators can do the sorting and marking tasks, and it also logs the last time it saw the sow, so I can figure out which sows haven't been through to see which are. It usually means a missing tag in most cases. This is, like I said, I'm not a very good cameraman, and you'll be able to tell that, but so the sows enter, and you can kind of see the panel reader. It's right on the side, and as soon as that tag is, it's almost instant. If there is no task to be performed, the front gate's open and the sows can run through it. When we're feeding, it seems like it takes a little longer, so we usually just open and let the sows through. It's one of the things I guess I would like to do someday, if I ever wanted to train all the sows, would be to turn these interrogators around and turn the one-way gates around, so that when the feed dropped, I'd have 3 one-way gates going right to the feed side, because it seems like they all congregate in the water court until they hear the feed lines running, and then they want to try to cram through the interrogator all at once. So, I think it would just help, because also underneath my interrogators is solid, and so we need to daily hose that off, because it can get kind of messy underneath there. After they're done eating, when they go through, they're not in a big hurry at all. The gates close behind them, so they don't have a sow pushing them through. So they're kind of like those people on the interstate in the Hammer Lane that are going 65 right beside somebody else, and you can't get them out of your way, and you're in a hurry. They're fine. It's almost frustrating to watch, because they don't have a care in the world. After about 30 minutes, it will open gates up to allow more sows through, so you don't get a big congestion in the water court. And this is I kind of have a slide on how it's set up. So we're weaning our sows into stalls and breeding them, and then a day or two after they're bred, as soon as they're out of heat, we're giving them a day to kind of come out of heat, so they're not jumping and trying to ride all the other sows. We're putting them right into the pens. We're not gestating in crates at all. I couldn't see how that would work with the space I had when we put it together. One side of the interrogators has parity 3s and above, and then the other side has the gilts, the parity 1s, and the parity 2s. And our gilts are kind of just a little bit different also. In the smaller pins, we heat our gilts, crate break them, and then we breed them on the second heat, and then we gestate them for about 5 weeks, and then we put them into a smaller training pen. That was another thing we changed, is we added a training pen inside one of the big pens, so that they could get used to eating under the trickle feed system with other animals. And after 3 weeks in the trading pen, then we put them into the bigger pen. And so here's just a picture of the training pen. We just threw a gate in the water, and they spend about 3 weeks in there just getting acclimated to eating with a trickle feed system. And so here's some of the benefits that I've seen. Sows kind of get to pick where they're more comfortable. We've got 2 rows between feeders where we have misters running, so in the summertime we have the ability to keep them a little more cool and comfortable. And they've also got 1 row where if they don't want to be wet, they can go over there and lay down. Don't need to do the movements to tighten up your snakes. I mean, it's a constant, it's a dynamic group on either side, so we're just, if there's extra space, they just get extra space. And I have found that I do use less water in this. My manure is more concentrated. The nitrogen content went up about 12 or 13 pounds per 1,000 gallons. And it's pretty easy to identify sows. If they're not feeling good, they're not going to get up and go eat. So we're identifying them. It's sows in heat. When we walk the boar along the fence, they come and find the boar. I took a picture. This was about a year and a half ago. We had a stretch of days where it was just unbearable. This was about 9 o'clock in the morning. It was 98 degrees, and the sows they seemed pretty comfortable. Some of the challenges that I've found is definitely getting the gilts set up to thrive in this system. Some of the things we've done is we've added one-way gates to our isolation acclimation room. So the gilts get used to going through one-way gates. Like I said, we're training them in those large pens. When I do put gilts into the large pens, we're putting them on the loafing side so they know where the feed is, and they'll go find the water. So they're going through there. And then it takes about a week of opening the interrogator up and getting them used to running through there before they'll go through it on their own. Another challenge is I'm constantly adding animals to the groups. It's definitely not a static group. When I built it, I thought I could get to a static group, but just add everything to one side for about 6-7 weeks, and then go to the other side and fill them. And it just didn't work because the older sows were pretty rough on the gilts. Boss sows and aggressive behavior. We do have some sows that do bite vulvas to get sows to move out of a feeding station. And you need to identify them and get them out of there. We found that because we didn't have the stalls, we didn't have our sow card above each sow, so we went to real-time data and used PigChamp handhelds out in the barns, and that's made a huge difference as far as making culling decisions on repeats. And then you can't treat the lame sows. If you have a sow go down or sick in those big pens, you got to get them out of there and get them into a smaller pen or a stall and treat them and help them recover that way. Vaccinations are difficult. We do a PERS quarterly vaccination, and it's kind of dangerous for the workers involved too, because you got 200 sows that are trying to get away from you. And so that's the other challenge, would be worker safety, I think. Knock on wood, my brother or I have not been hurt, but I've seen times when a sow will wheel around real quick and my knee's right close to where her head comes swinging around. So.
I thought I'd do a quick background for you. My name's Jared Sutton. I grew up on a small hog farm in north central Indiana. And I am a Hoosier, so I'm sorry. I know there's some Purdue people in the audience here. I see my friend Mike King over there. But I did go to IU, and how we do farming today is a heck of a lot different than we did it when I was a kid. And I always tell everybody I had 3 older sisters who didn't do anything on the farm, which means I did everything on the farm. And to hear and see what these guys are doing and testing and learning, man, it's great. I'm so proud and privileged to be able to work for hog farmers, and I've been here since April of 2000. I learned how to cut meat while working in a grocery store through college, and spent a few years working in the retail food distribution business, so I have kind of a good understanding of how the channel works. And I saw this job being offered as a retail marketing manager at the Pork Council back in early 2000. And I still remember my boss at the time who hired me, when the director of human resources handed her the stack of resumes, she had put a Post-it note on mine because she said, "This one seems aggressive. He calls me all the time." And I did, because I wanted to come to work for hog farmers. I have a lot of family that still raise a lot of hogs back in Indiana. And needless to say, we have a lot of interesting discussions when we all get together and sit around the Thanksgiving dinner table or have our grill outs in the summer when I go back home and visit. And as my job has evolved over 13 years at the Pork Council / Pork Board, I've realized a major gap, if you will, in knowledge and understanding of our food chain partners the customers that sell our products, and how pigs become pork. And I know that's kind of a maybe goofy thing to say, but you haven't said across the table from some of these folks who are literally buying millions and millions and millions of pounds of pork and don't make the connection that bacon comes from a pig. And, you know, words matter. I think about our communication strategy all the time, and I hear the word interrogator a couple of times, and I know things like that throw up red flags for people that aren't in the know. And unfortunately, that has given activist groups and our opponents a bit of an edge, because they've, as Dallas Hockman and I, you'll hear Dallas later today as he and I talk frequently, some of these folks are really, really good at being bad. HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States, can hold up a piece of paper and say, you know, how can you cage a chicken that lays eggs into a space no larger than this size? And, you know, clearly that creates a visceral image and a response from uninformed consumers, and quite frankly to uninformed consumers, many of which, as we all know, are very far removed away from the farm. The absolute worst can become believable. And that social media storm that has evolved and developed over the last 10 years has given some of these activist groups a terrific venue and audience and a vehicle to stimulate and cause this discussion that has warranted or created some concern. And some customers, some food chain partners have felt that they've needed to act on some of that concern because they feel in an incredibly competitive marketplace. You know, if you drive down the corner of, I live in Urbandale. Out in Urbandale, I have an intersection where there's a Wendy's on one corner and an Arby's on the corner, and a McDonald's, and then we have a Dolls right there and a Fairway down the street and a Hy-Vee. I mean, it's incredibly competitive, and they want your loyalty. And so it's a tough deal to try and help these guys navigate through all of this, especially when you have a copycat industry. We don't want to be seen as not being competitive with the other banners that are in my facet of the industry. And so if McDonald's were to make an announcement regarding something, we'll do it, because at Burger King or Wendy's or Jack in the Box, we're in that same kind of hamburger fast food joint category, and we don't want to lose the edge to them. And so it quickly becomes a copycat industry, and unfortunately not a lot of work goes into to evaluating some of these decisions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, and want to make sure we have time for your questions as well. That pressure, as I was saying, from we'll refer to them as NGOs, as non-government organizations. You know, it can be pretty great because of the funding that they generate, of the emotional argument that they put into play, and they also carry a bit of a threat. There's a threat to a negative smear campaign against a brand. And years ago, where you would see activists from an organization like PETA throwing blood on themselves and picketing out in front of stores. I was at the Ohio Pork Producers Annual Meeting, which is in February. It was probably about 2002 or 3. We were down in Dayton, Ohio, and it was about 4 degrees outside. And there was a young lady, I would assume college age, who had stripped naked, had herself painted in tiger stripes, and was in a cage out in front of the convention center where the Ohio Pork Producers meeting was being held. And the only reason I noticed is because when I walked by, there were about 40 hog farmers standing there looking out the window at her. And, well, do you think we ought to call somebody and have her removed? Well, you know, her lips are just starting to get purple. Let's wait a little bit longer, and then we'll call. Anyway, those days of that type of extreme activism seems to be, you know, certainly still there and a potential threat, but clearly there's a different edge in terms of the approach and the attack that some of these organizations will have against these companies. We've heard that with gestation stalls. We've heard it with sow housing for a while now. She can't turn around. And that's an argument that they'll continue to push. And there's over 100 different ways to house sows, and you've heard some experimentation of a few of those today. And that's the opportunity for us, is to educate these food chain partners who now have questions. And as I tell every one of them, what I was hired here to do, and what a large team of folks that work for you all at the Pork Checkoff, is how do we sell more pork at a higher price? How do we get more pork featured at grocery stores, and how do we get more pork put on the menus of these restaurant companies? And, you know, admittedly, we should have been more in front of some of these issues with with customers that had questions. But in the same breath, my colleagues were sitting right down the hall talking about other marketing opportunities and driving demand for pork products. And so bridging that gap is something that we're certainly focused on much more aggressively now. You have those undercover videos that will pop up and create a bit of a media storm. Those undercover videos have evolved to also link up with a customer. So this farm sells to this packer, which sells its branded products to these retail companies. And no retail company or food service company wants to have their name associated with any type of, whether there is abuse or not, and we can certainly talk about that, just the ick factor that is involved in that dark, ominous tone and the emotional spin that some of these groups put on it. And so all of that has clearly generated interest from these companies into our industry, and certainly the specific to sow housing. What we're doing at the National Pork Board, and we're working with a lot of folks, through U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, spent a lot of time and money investing our dollars with our friends in the barnyard, specifically the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, to better understand how to talk about this as well as other things with consumers. And so we'll talk things with pork about sow housing, how sows are housed, and and countless research projects that we've done. I'm kind of more of a sales guy. I think Mike would agree. I just want the executive summaries on this stuff. I can't. My brain doesn't work well to get into that data. But when I see it, then we start talking about it. People don't know what. Most people don't know what sows are. Most people don't know what sow housing is. They don't know what gestation stalls are. We did a quantitative study last June, and we asked people to rank things that were out there in the news in terms of priority and awareness. And the only thing anybody cared about was what the next whatever is coming from Apple, right? Everybody wants to know what the next thing is. The LIBOR banking scandal, anybody remember that? That rated much, I think it was like 7% knew about sow housing, something. And we've done that several times and continue to have that point to food retailers and food service companies. People don't know about this stuff. We've asked them several times, and I understand where you're coming from, and some people do, but let's categorize this, because the vast majority of folks that are shopping in your stores and eating in your restaurants, they're concerned about price, they're living week to week. Other things are more important to those folks. So let's make sure we keep this in perspective. But once again, as I said, to those uninformed consumers, they become prey, because while they want to trust those food companies to be doing the right thing, there's a vast majority of them that really don't know. And if you have better than half of them in this kind of movable middle, you've got this the challenge of who are they going to listen to and who are they going to believe. And so clearly, a need for us to be involved in that conversation. We'll talk about sow housing, the announcements. I know the Iowa pork producers had some discussion about that yesterday at their meeting. I actually had a day trip yesterday to fly to the East Coast for a meeting with a fairly large customer of ours, and I thought it was a good idea to leave and come back in the same day. I left the house at 4:30 in the morning. I got home about 11 o'clock last night. I know I don't get any sympathy from any of you here because that's a normal day on the farm, so I won't ask for it. But I wasn't able to attend the meeting yesterday, so if I'm redundant in anything I say, I apologize for that. But it's over 40 companies now over the last few years that have made some sort of an announcement about sow housing and what their requirements are. And believe you me, we've analyzed a lot of these. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of companies about these announcements, as have many others at the Pork Checkoff and the Pork Council. Each one of them is a little bit different. Now, there are a few that were early on who've said hard and fast, we're going to phase out the use of gestation stalls from our supply system by the year 2017 or 2022. Those seem to be the two magical numbers. But the vast majority of those announcements have gotten a lot more cloudy. We're going to work with our suppliers to evaluate the sow housing, and we're going to work with our suppliers to determine the best way moving forward. And there's actually two announcements in there that say we're going to work with our suppliers to phase out gestation in our supply chain. I'm not a biologist, but I think you need gestation. That's the point. You're looking for, some of these companies are looking for a very easy answer to obviously an incredibly complex issue that they know very little about. And so part of the work I've referenced Dallas Hockman at the National Pork Producers Council that he and I are doing, and many others, is to ensure that these companies really understand. If you want to get into this, let's talk about it, because clearly you're not putting a lot of time and energy and effort into understanding the issue. And part of the discussion I had yesterday and have on a weekly basis is with companies who are saying, man, we said it, now what? How are we going to do this? And how are we going to figure it out? How are we going to prove that we're doing it? And you know, there's a lot of, we can get into it if you all have questions about it, and we can talk further about some of the things that they're evaluating now. And also the long list of customers who haven't taken any kind of position or made any announcement. And that's something that we certainly continue to discuss with those companies. We talk about traceability, we talk about verification, all the things that our customers are looking for from our industry. And quite frankly, it's because we have a tremendous opportunity right now at pork. If you read any of the food service magazines, which I don't expect any of you to, but I'm kind of a geek with that, and I see what chefs are saying, I see what culinary experts, what they're teaching in schools. Pork is the it protein right now, and I know you all know that because, you know, we probably have it on our dinner table more than anybody in the country. But literally, from nose to tail, there is it's trendy, it's hot, and there's flavor, there's versatility. It's available, and there's tremendous value there. You can get your hands on it as a retail food service company. You can add a little bit of value, and you can sell it and make some good money. And a lot of these folks are looking at it in ways that they haven't before, and I'm incredibly excited about that, as you should be as well. It's no mistake that at the same time we're in the sights of some of the activist groups that would like to see a different agenda at work. And so we've got to be able to marry our science, right, the animal science, the veterinary science, the food science, with the social science, because there are people now that, again, based on the research that we've conducted and done with lots of other partners, is just an overall distrust in the food system. You know, you see or read or hear something every day in the news about this is good for you today, it's not good for you tomorrow, or you hear about things that are happening under, you know, undercover videos in food system production units. You know, we want to believe and we want to have faith, but then Lance Armstrong comes along and lies, you know, and there's always some. I think Lance Armstrong ought to send something to Manti Te'o, because that took him out of the news right away, and it's something like that, the constant cycle. And you detect that in focus groups and research that we continue to do, is just this natural cynicism and skepticism over the way that food is produced today. And so that creates a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. What we're doing now, and you know, I see Dale and Rick and some others from the media in the room that we've shared some of our enhanced outreach efforts, is to ensure, as I said earlier, that we're engaging further up the chain within some of these food companies to reach out to those sustainability officers. Does anybody know how to define sustainability? Because everybody I talk to defines it a little bit differently. The only thing I know is if you're not making money, you ain't going to be around very long, and that's not sustainable. So let's start there. I was at a sustainability conference in October, and the guy who was presenting from a university in Canada was telling all of these vice presidents and directors of sustainability for major food retail companies, imagine you folks are having a hard time getting the ear of your CEO within your companies. It's because they don't know exactly what you do. They hired you, but they don't know exactly what you do. And you say sustainability, it's 6 syllables. Nobody knows what that means. Start saying profit. It's 2 syllables. It's a lot easier, and that's all your CEO cares about anyway. Because if you ain't making money, you're not going to have happy stakeholders, and you're not going to be around for very long. So engaging with sustainability folks, educating them on who we are, what we do, and how our industry has progressed, and the fantastic story that we have to tell. Reaching out to quality and assurance folks. They're now, instead of, you know, pork quality influences like nutrition and things of that nature, they're thinking it even further back to how those animals are raised and how they're housed in some cases. Communications. There are questions that consumers are asking of these companies, and the communications folks need to be able to respond with confidence with the right answers. That's what your pork checkoff is doing, and we've made a concerted effort to invest dollars into consumer research. How do we talk about what it is that we do on the farm every day, and by the way, do it better than anybody else in the world, to continue to provide a safe, wholesome, affordable, abundant supply of product? What's the best messaging that consumers can understand? And you know, sometimes the words that we use in science don't always resonate with laymen and morons like me. We have to be able to boil it down into terminology that people can understand. The second piece is the economic perspective. The market will always respond. If customers want it, somebody will fill that need. I mean, that's, God bless America, that's free enterprise, that's what we do. But there are changes. If customers want to make a change and require this, there will be a cause and effect. There will be a change over here, and so we've got to help our business partners understand what some of those economic changes are in terms of availability and overall costs. The third piece is that sustainability part. And if changes are made over here, it has some sort of an impact over here, likely causing an increase in our overall global warming and carbon footprint. Those are big buzzwords in the industry now. You all read about it and hear about it all the time. But it's important, and companies create brand equity by making improvements in the products that they source and supply and how they maintain their operations to improve in their carbon footprint and maintain those prices. Because most people determine, you know, you look at a grocery store, you shop for the meat or the cleanliness, but ultimately it boils down to prices, and that's where you get into the major competitive structure. So we're spending more time. I affectionately refer to the guys that we've spent the majority of our time with as meatheads. We talk to the meatheads, the guys that are buying the meat and that are selling the meat. And that's where we've focused our efforts to ensure that they have everything they need about pork so that they can feel confident and comfortable selling and promoting it. We're going above and beyond that with some of the folks that I just mentioned, sustainability, communications, quality assurance. I'm trying to think of who was at the meeting yesterday, a large group that represent a lot of disciplines. And again, frankly, we have a story to tell. That's why I love working for hog farmers, is we're not going to sit on the sidelines and wait for this thing to play out. We're going to get engaged. We're going to figure it out. We're going to find the answers that our customers need so that we can keep doing business and continuous improvement. And that's what I tell every one of these companies. I mean, nothing on the farm that we do today is the same as it was, 20 years ago, 25 years ago when I was on the farm. It's different because we've responded, and it's better, and here's why. And so I haven't asked all 70,000 plus hog farmers in the U.S. if I could bring customers to their farm, but I've asked a lot of them, and every one of them has said yes. Nobody's ever said no. And I have a trip going to NC State next Tuesday in North Carolina, just so a newly formed customers animal welfare and sustainability committee, which is all internal folks within this retail organization. Some of them have never seen a farm and seen animals. I'm not kidding. This is the level of, this is where we got to start, at a very base elementary level. And these folks will be responsible for some sort of animal welfare policy within that company. So thankfully we have some good connections there. We're going to go to the farm. We're going to see real live pigs in the barn. It's going to be great. And we're going to spend a few hours talking about all of this so that they can understand how pigs become pork, and more importantly what pork means to their business and the opportunities to move forward with that. I think that I'll just leave with one more point and then open it up for discussion. As these announcements come, we've spent an awful lot of time educating customers about sows, how sows are housed, say that 3 times fast, the options for producers. Certainly you heard it from both John and Sean, is that when I go into a meeting, I say this, every time. You guys are interested in sows. I don't care if they're in stalls or pens or happy green pastures or what. What I care about is the producer's ability to determine what's best given his system and his operation. It's the freedom to operate for hog farmers that we're focused on. Why do you care about it, Mr. Retailer or Food Service Company? Because I'll take you out to any farm and I'll show you exactly everything that goes on, and you'll learn. I just learned a lot today. And that's the focus, is the point of freedom to operate and freedom to choose. And I'm extremely optimistic about where we're headed and the response that we've received thus far from the extra levels of engagement that we've had with some of these food companies, and I'm excited about the future.